As we've been reporting, the identity of Maskode Bizhiki'ikwe, or Buffalo Woman, has been revealed more than 3 years after she was murdered by a Winnipeg serial killer. Ashlee Shingoose's remains are believed to be in the Brady Road landfill south of the city. Manitoba Premier Wabkinew has already committed to the family that a search will happen there. For more on this, our Truth and Politics panel is here. Jennifer Leywitz is the CEO of Pasqua Harbor Strategies. And helping us out this week is Sheila North, the Executive Director of External Indigenous Relations at the University of Winnipeg. Jennifer, Sheila, thanks for being with us. Sheila, appreciate you taking some time for us this week. And I guess for starters, just your reaction to Winnipeg police finally identifying Maskode Bizhiki'ikwe, or Buffalo Woman.
It was definitely a very sad day, and my heart goes out to the family and community and friends of Ashlee Shingoose. It seems like that we've been waiting for this answer for a long time, but when we finally get it, it's not an easy thing to think about and to process, and I can't imagine what it's like for the family and the friends and the community. But I'm glad it's happened. I'm glad she's named. I'm glad we know who she is, and I'm glad leaders and community and allies and everyone never stopped finding answers for who this person is, and now we know Ashlee Shingoose, and I'm glad that she's going to be going home with her family.
Jennifer, unlike last time, there was an immediate pledge from Premier Wabkinew that a search for Ashlee Shingoose will happen at the Brady Road landfill south of the city of Winnipeg. Police and the city of Winnipeg also seem to be changing their tune on a search happening this time. Your thoughts on those developments?
Yeah, Premier Wabkinew seems to be getting a little bit more comfortable in his role, especially as it comes to these advocacy pieces, because really during the last election in Manitoba, when this was such a contentious and front-facing issue, and we were actually seeing the PC party in Manitoba campaigning on not searching the landfill, I can imagine that, behind the scenes, this might have been causing a little bit of uncertainty for Premier Wabkinew, because it was a big task to take on. It was, an issue he had to put faith into, that it was going to turn out to be the right thing to do. But what would have happened if they would have, poured all these money and resources into this search, and he might have ended up coming up saying, hey, I'm sorry, we at least tried. But now he's been, almost a little bit vindicated, and so has the late Grand Chief Kathy Merrick, in their advocacy and the fact that they were right. They were right all along, and they did the right thing. And now these families are getting a little bit of closure that they deserve, because we had leaders that were not scared to advocate for what the right thing was to do. And I'm glad to see Wabkinew now standing a little bit taller and a little bit more firm in the fact that he is full support behind this humanitarian search and what it means to find her remains. And I think we all need to wrap our arms around him, especially in his advocacy for getting this done, and also holding the people accountable that didn't want to get it done.
Sheila, as a longtime journalist and former Grand Chief, unfortunately, you've been in a lot of these press conferences about missing or murdered Indigenous women. Did anything from yesterday's press conference stand out for you? There was a lot of talk about learning from the past and finding a new path forward.
I have to say it was refreshing to hear the Winnipeg police talk the way they did, and we know this because we have now a new Winnipeg police chief, and I believe he is the right person for this time, and he knows the value of what it's like to embrace reconciliation, and he's walking and talking in it. Let's see how it goes in the next few years, but for this important moment, I'm glad that he's there and that they're there and that they're willing to say that they were wrong and can start to look at a different process and a different relationship and strengthening that relationship. And I also have to credit a lot of the community that was there. You know, it was, of course, a press event, which usually means it's the media who should be in the audience, but community immerses itself in these situations these days, and I'm glad they do, because they're making real change and real impacts. And we saw their efforts and their abilities in making those camps, like a lot of the warriors that never gave up. And we're seeing what that can do when our people join together and move mountains.
Yeah, it seemed really different there yesterday, not to mention that the Premier sang, which is something you're not going to see too often. At least we do now. But Jennifer, still renewed calls this week to hold a public inquiry still into how Winnipeg Police and the former PC government handled this all. Do you think that should still move forward, still happen?
Absolutely. I think right now we need to not lose sight of the victims, their families, and also still the humanitarian search for Ashlee Shingoose. I think that's, should be top priority of everything. But also, I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of the victim's family or friends or anything like that, but I think that this would absolutely bring also some closure, is figuring out the process behind the scenes and the decisions that were made. And if there's people or these institutions that need to be held accountable, that they're held accountable, but also we take the findings in those reports and utilize it to actually see authentic change, not just a report that's going to be put on a shelf somewhere, but what are you actually going to do differently to make sure that women are protected and, our relatives are protected. And I know my chief made a comment last week about this might include some changes to policy around landfills, especially when, monsters out there like this are seeing how much advocacy needed to go into actually just searching these landfills. What is that telling other people out there that might be preying on our most vulnerable? So this might include some changes even with municipalities and how landfills are operated.
So moving to a different topic now, and over the last week and a half, the company that became a country is going through its slow death. I guess, Sheila, maybe we'll start with you and your thoughts on the dying days of the Bay.
I've had a love and hate relationship with the Bay and its association to our people and the fur trade, and also its association to Northwest Company, because they're all related in some way. They've all had the similar path and how they immerse themselves into our lands and our country. While I did like the nostalgia of Hudson Bay, I also don't mind it now going away, because, I think while they are in existence, I feel all the time, even Northwest Company, that they should be owned by our people at this point, and everything that they've ever made, because they're wealthy. Everyone that was ever associated with the Hudson Bay Company and even Northwest Company now, they're extremely wealthy, and yet our people are still poor. They're the ones that were part of the fur trade from the beginning, and we're still poor, and so I feel a little bit vindicated for our people that they're finally coming to a closure and coming to an end. And I don't know if people understand that generally, like they're running to try and grab the colors and the blankets of these this company, but yet some of these ones were the very ones that carried TB into our people. And so there's a lot of history there. It's a learning moment, I think, that we could all even expand on.
Yeah, not seeing a lot of stories of the Indigenous reaction to the end of the Bay. Seeing a lot of, I'll say older people having tears over the nostalgia of it all. But Jen, your thoughts on the end of the Bay?
I completely reiterate everything that Sheila said, because absolutely correct. I've seen memes from my fellow Indigenous people kind of making some light humor about the closing of the Bay. I obviously don't want to be insensitive either, and I acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of people that are going to be losing their jobs, and in a cost of living crisis, that's not lost on me. And I saw a news article yesterday that allegedly some of the executives within the Hudson Bay are still going to be getting bonuses while employees won't be getting severance, because if a company is going into consumer protection or whatever it might be, then the employees, unfortunately, at the end of the day, have nothing to turn to. And I do know what that's like. My grandma worked over 25 years for a very large, similar company like Hudson Bay in Canada. And I can't imagine what it would have been like for her to lose her job without severance near the end of her career. But with that being said, again, what Sheila said about our people are still poor. I'm a First Nations woman that's in my 30s as a business owner, and even participating in this economy is so difficult. And for us, we were never granted that same opportunity to own businesses or to thrive in this country in an economic way. And even in 2025, it's like I have a really, really hard time feeling sorry for large corporations and companies like this when on a day-to-day basis, some of our people are still struggling the most, even to just participate in the economy. And yeah, I definitely feel very sorry for the people that are out of their jobs, but it almost seems like a closure or an end of an era for something that was so impactful and harmful to our people too.
Right. I guess we'll move on now to the election and week one so far. Jen, you and I did a podcast this week talking about how Indigenous issues have not even been mentioned really so far. Sheila, I guess just your thoughts on the first week of election 2025 here.
Yeah, and just to jump off what you just said, that Indigenous issues are not really at the top there. We hear the Indigenous people mentioned when they talk about resources and natural resources, just a tiny bit, and then trying to give us an inkling or a notion that we're going to be rich and our people are going to be rich and wealthy if they participate, and that seems to be the only reference. But there's definitely a different feel. It's not the same as in 2015 when Justin Trudeau was getting into power and leading the Liberal Party. We were just finished and right in the middle of doing Idle No More marches for missing and murdered Indigenous women. Rock the Vote was happening. So our people were engaged in 2015 and they were ready to participate, and they did come out in droves. They made a huge difference in the election. But it doesn't feel the same this time, even though most of Canadians seems like they are starting to rally towards the Carney leadership. It's not the same for Indigenous people. It doesn't have that same fervor and even excitement by a lot of people.
Yeah, that's Sheila, exactly what Jennifer and I were saying over on the In Focus podcast with Sierra Bettens. I'll just plug that we were on there this week talking about that. Jennifer, your thoughts on week one here?
Definitely, it's concerning that Indigenous issues don't seem to be at the top priority. And even as I'm doing media and talking with more and more people in the last week over the election, it says there's not really anything tangible on the Indigenous side, which I find absolutely mind-boggling, because in the last 5 years alone, we've moved mountains. We saw Bill C-92 at the forefront, child welfare autonomy, and it doesn't just stop there. That means that we now have the groundwork laid and a Supreme Court decision behind that to start talking about areas of autonomy over healthcare, education, and all of these different areas. But, I talked to somebody this morning that said, well, I think, these political parties are trying to get away from identity politics, but this isn't identity politics. But unfortunately, we get treated that way. And, I was talking to somebody from a First Nation community not far from mine this week, and they said, well, I was going to vote Liberal again, but, the situation on the res is worse now than it was 10 years ago. And I'm like, well, then why? Why is that? What does that mean for us? Because I feel like it's getting more and more difficult for political parties to even sell themselves as a benefit to our people when we're seeing the benefit of what it looks like to achieve sovereignty and autonomy over things. And, you might have the NDP say, hey, we're going to build more houses in this country, but some of their policies directly impact the consultation over our lands. And, you have the Conservatives saying, hey, we're going to go into the resource full steam ahead with no consultation or consent. And then you have Mark Carney in the middle saying, I'm not even going to touch any of this, but I am going to double the National Loan Guarantee Program. It's like, well, there's a lot of conversation happening here across the board. But at the end of the day, I don't see any of these parties doing anything worthwhile to sell to First Nations as a good thing, when I think the good thing here is what we're doing on our own to achieve success, and which party is going to be alongside us to see it happen.
Sheila, not sure if you wanted to pick up on any of those points, but just what you'd like to see if we were going to get some of these issues on the table here. What are some of the things you'd like to see the leaders talking about?
Well, present company excluded, but I think media also has a lot to do with the conversations that are not happening across the country. But yeah, all the points that Jenna raised, I think we need to hear about what's important to our people. And that, of course, is how we should be in the driver's seat when it comes to making decisions about our land, our waters, our children, our communities, our lives, and how we want to see even our lives are impacted in urban centers. So I think there is a lot of work to do. It's not a lack of issues, and it's not a lack of people willing to talk about it, but media also needs to be held accountable and hold itself accountable to start talking about this and press the leaders and the parties to also talk about it. And maybe when we start to see more Indigenous candidates, that'll happen, hopefully, but I don't know.
Yeah, I will just say that the Mark Carney event in Halifax, the other reporters were trying to actually prevent our reporter from getting a chance to ask a question. Gonna go back to you one last time, Sheila, because we don't get you too often. And you were in a leadership role during the points of this Trudeau era, where we for sure saw record amounts of money going into Indigenous issues. But did things get any better?
I want to say yes, but I can't. I mean, I think we did see a lot of money, but what did it actually do? Like, we saw the Indigenous Affairs Canada become 2 departments, and then they doubled their staff, and they doubled their wages, and they doubled their budgets. But what did we really see on the ground? Did we see big changes? Are we better off? In some ways, maybe, but I don't think in a big overall piece we are, because we weren't included in every decision that was made, and we weren't included in the design of programs. So I think that was the huge missing piece.
Jennifer, Sheila, we'll have to leave it there for this week. Sheila, again, thanks so much for helping us out, and we'll talk to you all soon.
You're welcome, Ekase.
Thanks.